Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on how to mix that band on a Soundcraft Ui16 presented by Austin Hamilton. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a chat function where you can submit questions to the presenter and they'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded and the link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional University to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Austin Hamilton, the presenter for today's webinar. Austin is the owner of Superior Tech Services, LLC, producer of 10 Show Radio, and production manager at Big Top Chautauqua.
Chautauqua.
If you saw how that was spelled, you wouldn't get it either. In Bayfield, Wisconsin. Over the last 17 years, he has worked as a system technician and engineer in a variety of settings, in addition to designing and installing commercial audio systems. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Austin.
Thank you very much. Hey everybody, welcome to How to Mix That Band on the Soundcraft Ui16. Like she said, I'm the PM up at Big Top Chautauqua, produce a radio show. I've been using this console in particular for, I don't know, several years now. I think I bought it just a couple months after it was released. Yeah, so the summary of this class, how to mix that band. We've all been in that situation where we gotta just kind of show up and roll with it, you know, little to no information or having to deal with, you know, the inexperienced band. Maybe they don't have the information, they don't know what information is needed. So we're just gonna run through that and hopefully by the end of it, you'll be able to walk in and gig with using this console here. Who is that band? We'll start with, you know, that band is, like I said, the new band, the young band, maybe the local bar band, you know, the dad band down the road, doesn't quite know what they need or, you know, how to give it. This is, I just put up on my screen, this is my console here in the rack. It's a little haphazard. I just had to pull an amp out of the top, but you'll see, you know, pretty straightforward, easy rack mount, little rack mount mixer. I've actually pulled mine. You can see this is where the antenna would be. I've actually pulled that off, and I'll explain why in a little bit. All right, here's the front panel. We'll give you a little bit better picture of it. 12 inputs, 8 of which are the combo XLR 1/4 inch. Then those first two actually feature this high Z input function. So, you know, if you don't have a direct box, or you'd rather just run your guitar, bass, or unbalanced line straight in, this console has that ability to do that. That also has those first two channels also have the Digitech amplifier modeling, which we'll look at a little bit closer moving forward or in the future. At the top there, you'll see there's two, the stereo line in, RCA left and right for house music, playback, whatever you need. Output section, you see here, master outputs and the signal indicators. So there's a balanced XLR outputs and then also balanced 1/4 inch outputs. These are in parallel here, that in case you want to run an external recorder or, you know, a separate room feed or whatever you need. They also have separate master level control or physical control here for adjustments, along with the headphone control next to it. Auxes there up at the top, four output standard that's auxes 1 through 4. The neat thing is these headphones down here can actually be your aux 5 and 6 on the left and right. These headphone jacks are in parallel as well, so just keep that in mind. It's not when you set the console to have auxes 5 and 6. It's not 5 and 6. It's both of them are 5 and 6. So it's actually an unbalanced output. 5 would be left and 6 would be right. It's also got this advanced feedback suppression system on each output. I don't use it a whole lot, but it definitely has its place, and it's pretty. It can be very useful. Up at the top, you'll see the USB ports. The two of them, one for playback, one for record, so you can run playback and record simultaneously. You can also handle loading and exporting scenes through there. The Wi-Fi antenna. So I just take this off, or I just took it off so it doesn't get broken. I don't generally use the built-in hotspot. I have an external access point that I use for a little bit better range and reliability. This indicator light, if you have network connectivity, that's there. If it's for boot, that's also kind of the indicator for boot, or while you're booting up, it flashes. On the side, there's a few more. We'll just run down the reset button. This reset is kind of dual function. The first function is resetting the Wi-Fi. Everybody's had Wi-Fi trouble, signal dropping out, access points not quite working. This will reset your whole Wi-Fi adapter here. The foot switch and the USB foot switch is mute and unmute effects. It doesn't have a lot of use for what I use my console for. If you're using this just for mixing your band, I think it would definitely come in handy. And then the USB ports there. Next, these ones are for file management, import, export of show files, also for firmware updates, which you may need. The HDMI port doesn't have any functionality at the moment. And then the Ethernet port here at the bottom, this is where you would connect your external access point, or like in my case today, I'm actually running it hardline into a switch and then to my computer for control, so that you'll be able to see it. With that kind of gives the rundown of the physical characteristics of it. We'll switch over here to the user interface. When you first connect with your Wi-Fi or with your tablet or phone or computer or whatever, you'll be greeted by this screen here. Two options. This will give you the phone layout or the tablet layout. On a bigger screen, tablet's definitely the way to go. Phone layout's kind of, it's useful if you have a band that's kind of mixing their own monitors from the stage. They can use their phone to connect. This settings up here, that's for Wi-Fi configuration, basic system settings. We're not going to worry about that today. So we'll select the tablet mode for our layout. Here's the main page, main layout. Here's all your channel output faders. You'll see you can slide back and forth. Oops. As we slide back and forth. Channels 1 through 12, line in. This is that RCA plug on the front. Player here, this is for the USB playback. One neat thing that I just learned recently, actually, so I needed it. When you can actually unlink both of these, so that you'll have two separate mono unbalanced line ins if needed. And then same thing with the USB port. If you wanted to run tracks on one and click on the other, that would, that comes in pretty handy. Ooh. So, all right, as we move down, effects outputs. subgroup outputs, aux outputs. Get down to the end. This one's set up right now for auxes, to have auxes 5 and 6. If it weren't there, if it was configured for the headphone jacks on the front to be the Q or master output, these would just not be on this main page, and the sends would be grayed out in the others. And then this is your stereo master output. Go back to the beginning here, or back to the first page. Yeah, so we'll run through, again, up here at the top you'll see this button up here is the metering, and if we had input you would see all your meters here. You'll see all the metering here, and then the more me function, again, this is if you have a band that's kind of running their own monitors, this would be really useful for them, because then you can assign channels to just the me side of this, and then the other channels would show up in band, and they can kind of, this will adjust the mix between them, and then you have separate independent control as well. Mute group, this is all your mute group assignments. 6 mute groups you can kind of assign through here, pretty standard. The view groups here as well. This is very useful as well in the situations that we'll be talking about shortly. You can assign any channels, any outputs, anything to any of these view groups. So if you're not using, channels 9 through 12, you can just say, or you won't see them on your page, even if they're, you can assign it so that you won't see them, and they won't be in your way. And then subgroup assignment here, so 1 through 4, channels 1, 1 through 4, and then moving on up at the top here, mixed gain. I know if you hit this mixed gain button, this is kind of your home page. If you're on any other page, this will always bring you back to here. You click it again, these faders down below, they become your head amps or your gains. So you can bring it up and all your input gain. This page is also where you find that high Z function, if you need that, and then phantom power and polarity as well. It only shows you the input channels. It only shows you the input channels on this page. Going over next, the edit button. We're on channel 1 here. Those, like I said, those have that Digitech amp modeling. That's on channels 1 and 2. That'll be this first tab in the channel strip. This edit button is kind of your channel strip function, or what would be the channel strip on an analog console or any other console. You can patch through here, and then presets for a few different amplifiers. Pretty not particularly useful for the one-off gig, but if you're doing the same band over and over, it can be really, really nice to just have all your amp presets built into this. And then also stage volume is an issue. You can use that for this as well, or use this for that as well. 4-band parametric EQ on every channel with a high-pass filter. They all have RTA, or every EQ has an RTA function, hold. And then the de-esser, we won't go through too much of that or we'll touch more on it later, but we won't go too in depth. Compressor and gate on each channel, pretty straightforward. I would guess most of you understand those functions. Under this next tab, the effect sends. This is if you want to send individual channels to each effect, or each aux send is the next one. But in this page, it gives you control over all of the, or lets you manipulate the parameters of each effect engine. So if you hit delay, it brings you to the delay page. And then there's the tap, or global tap. This will tap every single effect through it all. And then kind of over here, or next on the aux sends, same principle, just for outputs instead of effects. next down the line. This aux button up here brings you to sends on fader, basically, if you're familiar with that option. You can select which aux you want up on top, and then send each individual channel to it. Pretty straightforward. Same thing, sends on fader for effects. The little play button up here, gives you playback for all your USB or all the files on your USB drive will show up in here. It's also where you have control over the record functions and whatnot. Settings menu. We won't go too in depth here, but this option right here is where you would choose between what the headphone jack does, master solo versus aux, and then solo routing, solo mode, everything through all that. This here is where you would choose what your pedal function does. If you remember that pedal jack on the side, this is where you choose what the pedal actually does. And that's all pretty. We won't go too into depth with the settings. The things I wanted to touch on in here, this is for control and wireless and Ethernet configuration. That's all in this page, or most of it's in this page, or at least it'll tell you where you're at. Hotspot is if you're connecting directly to the unit, you'd be using that front antenna that I've taken off of mine personally. Connect there. The Wi-Fi here is if you want to connect to an existing network. It has its place. It's useful. I don't generally recommend using an unknown wireless network for control, especially if you don't have your console password protected or locked down or anything like that. You never really know who's on the network, who's poking around. You don't want to accidentally give away control of your desk. I'm using the Ethernet here. You'll see it's enabled, IP address, net mask, and everything. I believe you can actually set this up for remote control over the internet too. I haven't done that. I don't need it. I would assume it's just like any other control over IP. Access, this is where you would password protect your console if you chose to do so. I don't, nobody has access to this that I don't trust, so I don't feel the need to lock it down. I say that now, but who knows what happens at the next gig, right? Shows, all your scene management, show management, separate shows, snapshots inside of each show. I have different bands here. The default and the initial, that's kind of your 0 start. That's where we're at right now. I will go ahead and load up the next Paul Seabar. I had him here a few weeks ago, or a few months ago now, I suppose. We'll load that. We'll go through some of the other settings. Frame rate, and then this will tell you which firmware you're on. I believe I'm on the most current public firmware. I'm not running the beta currently, although that is an option. All right, up here at the top, I'm going to get out of full screen here so you can see it. Up here at the top, there's a pull down quick access to your shows pretty easily. And then this UI button here gives you the slide out at the end, and this will kind of let you configure your views, gives you quick access to your mute groups, view groups, your panic button down here, mute all, mute effects, your tap. This is a global tap function. Each one of these, it changes your view in your master or your main page. This one, input only, effects return, subgroups, aux masters. And then view groups here is where you would, if you choose this, then I wasn't using the playback or the USB playback in here, so I took those out just to kind of make it a little bit easier to navigate. We'll just leave that off for now. All right, so that band, I think that's a decent rundown, I hope, of the interface of the console itself. We'll go more into depth with some of these functions in a little bit once we move on to soundcheck and whatnot. All right. That band, first contact. You know, we always try to advance. You know, get a hold of the band ahead of time, advance, find out what they need. You know, everybody gets a very, the very thorough advance in right away. You know, yeah, right. So, you know, after our advancing stage, you know, in this case, it doesn't really happen. Either the band doesn't get back to you, or they don't have the correct information, or maybe you don't even know who the band is. You're just hired for, you know, a corporate gig that hires some other band, or hired by the venue. Not really sure. So we'll go over what I call kind of the 4 Ps of the guerrilla gig, the unknown show that we don't, you know, very little information about it. When you first walk in, the first P is power, straight up. You know, where is it? How much power do you have? How much do you need? And what kind? You know, is it Edison? Do you tie in tails, cam locks, range plug, whatnot? Yeah. Next, the second P, people. Where is the audience going to be? How many people? How many people are there, or are you expecting in the audience? Where's the staff? One thing that's often overlooked by us tech folks is the staff. You know, everybody wants the audience to have a good time, but you also want to have all the staff like you too, because they're the ones that are going to kind of have the boss's ear, the person signing your check. They're going to be the ones that that'll say, boy, that was really great, and make sure you come back. Yeah. So the next of the 4 Ps, placement. This is, you know, pretty common knowledge, but it's always worth looking at again. You know, placement of everything. Where is, you know, where are you going to put the main PA in relation to the stage, in relation to the audience? For maximum coverage. Monitor placement, microphone placement. You'll see this in the picture here, kind of gives a good idea of where you know, why you should be paying attention to placement. So you make sure you have your wedges in the you know, pointing at the artist's ears, but then also making sure that you have the mics placed so that the wedges are in the rejection zone of the microphone. You know, this is kind of step 1 in feedback elimination, and even, you know, getting a solid mix out front. Make sure that your mics are, you know, make sure that your wedges are good, and your mics are pointed where they need to be. This will, yeah. If you have all your placements set correctly, you know, you'll hardly ever have to ring out your wedges, or it won't take much to ring out your wedges at all if you have everything placed correctly. Moving on, the players, arguably the most important part of all of this. You know, talk to them as soon as they show up. Get them their input, get the input list from them, their stage plot. You know, most of them aren't going to have one, you know, ready, printed up. So, you know, they'll draw one out for you. You know, this is this is a stage plot I got recently for a band here in town. This is, about as useful as it looks. Yeah. This is a better one from another band nearby. At least it shows you exactly what instruments they have, and it's legible. Input list, this is from the same band before. It was, they were nice enough to text me a picture of their computer screen with all this information, but at least it's legible and it's easy to understand. So you got your stage plot, your input list. Note any special requests or any special needs, anything unique instruments. Yeah. And pre-show mixer configuration. Back over here to the user, to the UI interface. So you want kind of a generic, or if you don't know what the show is, if you don't know what the band is, a lot of times it's good just to have kind of a generic input list, knowing that, your kick drum and snare drum and hat and everything or your drum kit always goes in these, X number of channels. Your bass is always in this channel. It makes your throw and go shows, the unknown shows, their sound check just go a lot faster where you have kind of your preset channels. Also, if you're doing multiple bands that night, it makes it a lot easier to switch over, where you don't have to try to repatch per band's input list. So you got your input list. You can label them all down here at the bottom. If you long press along the bottom here, it'll give you your rename. You can rename, copy settings. You can also do all your subgroup assignments, stereo links, channels, and whatnot. Down there. My one point of contention, the thing that consistently bothers me about this desk is that you can't, on a PC, you can't right-click these. I don't know, maybe they've changed that in the Ui24. Chime in there, Scott, if you know. But otherwise, just long press on that with your mic or with your mouse or on a tablet, just long press.
So we have the long presses in there because the browser works on a browser. It works on tablets and on phones and on computers. Yeah. And so double tapping is not always consistent on a lot of those things. So we try to really focus on doing tap, double tap, or tap and hold. Okay, or alt click would be a good one too. But it's no, as long as you know it, it's no big deal. All right, so where are we at? Input labeling, and then I always like to have everything preset for mix bus assignments. If you have your festival or your generic input patch. I always assign kind of the same subgroups here. For this show, I put the drums and the bass together in subgroup 1. Keys or, any other kind of, I guess, synthetic instruments would be in subgroup 2. Your, samples, anything else would go in there. In here, and then for this show in particular, I put the sax and the guitar in channel or in sub 3 and vocals in sub 4. Most people are pretty familiar with subgroups, but it allows you to compress and EQ instruments together as a group. So if you're having some odd addition, frequency additions and subtractions or cancellations, you can fix that in here. These act just like channel strips. You can double click on here, brings you to the channel strip, EQ, dynamics, effects sends, and then it'll bring you back to your main page. And same deal. And then label your, lay out your auxes as well at the same time, or while you're laying out your subgroups. Don't send to it right away. You'll just kind of get yourself into trouble there a lot of times. But I always like to, on these unknown gigs, or
any gig really. I always like to lay out my auxes from house left to house right, and same thing, every channel, everything from house left to house right, so that you always know that aux 1 or monitor 1 is always going to be the far stage right wedge, and vocal 1 is always going to be the far stage right vocal, and same thing with the guitar and whatnot. It makes it so that you don't have to, it's easier to keep an input list in your head while you're patching. If you're working with a group of people, if they understand that, it leads to fewer mispatches if everybody's kind of on the same page with that. It's kind of an industry standard or industry best practice. Almost every venue, every production company, every artist I've worked with, almost everyone has them laid out that way once you get kind of above a certain level. On a 16-channel desk, you're kind of limited in that. You know, I mean, you can still lay it out that way, but you know, it's only 16 channels. It's not like you're hunting across 48 to find your stuff. After your mix bus assignments, your monitor layout, you know, then I generally, you know, mute and view group assignments, or once you know what you have, start assigning mutes. You know, I generally do the instruments all on one and then vocals on another, so you can mute the band and let an MC or whoever talk in the mics. Yeah. And then once you have everything laid out, mic'd, input lists, pinned and whatnot, feedback control, you want to ring your wedges out. Generally, you know, you'd want to have this done pretty quick before the band, usually before the band gets there, but, you know, sometimes it just doesn't work that way. So, you know, get your wedges rung out. Most of the time, you know, if you have decent gain structure and your wedges are placed and your mics are placed well, you can ring out your wedges pretty quick. But in the instances where you can't, where you don't have that option or you weren't able to, that's where this AFS2 comes in handy down here at the bottom, this setup. If you hit setup here, you'll see there's a few different options. This fixed mode, that's kind of the equivalent of ringing out your wedges by hand or by ear, flattening your boxes. You just set it up and let the algorithm do its work. All right, down here. Lock will make it so that if you're on lock, it won't, your AFS2 won't change anything else, but it'll keep the cuts that are already there. In live mode, this is kind of for the unknown. If you're not really sure what's coming next, that'll catch everything. That'll catch any, you know, feedback spikes and whatnot. I'm generally not a fan of automatic feedback suppression, but in this instance, they seem to have done a pretty good job with how they've implemented it. Some of the earlier feedback automatic ones, you know, you'd have, if a guitar player was holding a note, you'd hear the feedback suppression kick in and, you know, turn the guitar down. That was always kind of a fun thing to encounter, especially if you weren't expecting it or didn't understand what was going on. Yeah, same thing. I've had it with singers too, but yeah, that's about it for the AFS2, and you turn it on here. I don't know that we have. Yeah, there's none of the feedback. The feedback suppressor hasn't caught anything in this show file, or hasn't caught anything here, so you can't see it. But there'll be a little gray line dip for the frequency where the AFS caught it. Yeah, and then from there, you know, send all your channels, or send your, you know, whatever channels you want to effects after that. I generally leave effects sends until after sound check, or after your first quick check, but just because on the list of priorities, if you're short on time, effects, aren't exactly as important as getting the band up and running. Yeah, so from there, so let's see. That's the basic board layout. Moving on, after you have your console laid out, set up, you want to move on to soundcheck. I'll kind of run you down my general plan for sound checks in a time crunch or for a quick show. When you have to get everything up and running quickly. And this way you can get a pretty good sized band done in about 15 minutes without much trouble. It won't be exactly dialed in, but at least you can get the show running right off the bat. The first thing you want to do for sound check in a time crunch, talk to the band before you even get to the console. Talk to them ahead of time about your sound check, what the game plan is, how you want to run it. I typically just say, hey, look, I'm just going to run through the input list, kick, snare, hat, down each channel. If you wouldn't mind, just raise your hand if you need it in your wedge and put your hand down when you're done. Yeah, put your hand down when you have enough in your wedge. If you can, talk to them ahead of time. Don't be afraid to respectfully correct people on stage during a quick sound check if you're running short on time. Hey, lead guitar player, maybe now's not the time to be setting your amp tone. Yeah. Keep playing. But keep it light. It's a lot easier to get through stuff quickly if everyone's relaxed. Yeah. So after your game plan's up, I generally will go out front, start with the vocals, or I usually go through the input list from channel 1 to channel to the last channel. It can be helpful to start with the vocals first, just because then they can talk back to you and tell you what they need. That might also be a reason why you don't want to start with the vocals first. Maybe it's better to just get through everything else before you let the band talk. But generally, so we'll start with the vocals here. My quick plan, or my quick workflow for sound check in a time crunch, I set the output faders at unity, the mix mains at unity, and even the auxes here at unity through the whole thing, through the whole signal chain, and then I leave, and then from there, if your system's gained properly, kind of the perceived volume, it seems to kind of wind up to be loud enough out front once the gain is at where it needs to be, and loud enough in the monitors for the artist. So if you send your monitor, we're starting with vocal 1, so we send vocal 1 to aux 1 at unity 2 before we set the gain. I missed that before. And then you turn, just have them then turn it up and have them check their mic until they have enough. Winds up there. That's generally pretty close to where you need it out front too. Always start with the person. Always start with the mix who's using the mic, or if it's vocal 1, start in mix 1, or whoever or whichever wedge they're using. It's pretty. It's always pretty close for me anyway. Doing it that way, and then as it's coming up in the mains as well, you can do any quick corrective EQ. We'll double click down below here. Quick corrective EQ, high pass filter is generic. If you're using whatever 58, get rid of 160 or 200 or whatever. That proximity effect. I'll generally not even worry about dynamics, the compressors and whatnot right off the bat. If you got to just get through sound check, just get it up and make sure there's no feedback and move on to the next. But after you have your quick corrective EQ done, you can, send it out to the rest of the band. Then the rest of the band comes, and you just go through channel by channel like that. It's the same principle. Unity, you got unity there. We'll go back to the aux sends again. Unity, set the gain, bring the gain up, and then any quick corrective EQ or standard EQ stuff. And then send it out to the rest of the band, and that'll get you through. Run, one right down the other, one channel after the next. That's pretty much it. After we do every channel that's needed, after you're through the whole thing, whichever channels you need, I usually have the band play a quick verse or a chorus or something, and then do any quick any monitor mixes they need or any monitor adjustments they need, and then I'll finish kind of my main sound check during the first couple songs if we're really tight for time. Yeah, and then it's showtime. A few quick notes for show with this console and with any tablet controlled console or mobile control surface. Stay close to the band for the first few songs. They don't want to be hunting for you out in the crowd. Stay close, tell them where you're going to be for those first couple of songs so they know where to look. If they need monitor adjustments, they need, if they need anything. Yeah, then, the advantage to a tablet is you're able to wander the room and hear what it sounds like in other parts of the room instead of right at the soundboard, and control it right there with you. Even if you're on a stationary desk, you should still be walking around, but a tablet makes it a lot easier. One other thing, the mixer view or the view groups for Showtime, in this, like I said, in this case, we have the line in player we're not using. We'll go, for the Showtime, I hit the view group that has the channels that I need in it. And then, mute the effects in between songs or when they're talking and whatnot. That's kind of my rundown for the Gorilla gig, or that dealing with that band, or dealing with that band. I guess from there, I'll open up the Q&A. If there's anything, questions, whatnot.
Yeah, we do have some questions here.
Okay.
So the first one is asking, is there an offline editor available for UI16 for iPad, Mac, or PC?
That I actually don't know. I've always just done everything on the console. Scott, maybe you could chime in there.
I'm not sure on UI16. On UI24, we have an offline editor that is the browser on the Soundcraft webpage. You can use the Soundcraft browser, go to the software demo, create your setup, and save that file, put it on the USB stick, take it to the gig, and load it. I've never done that on 16. I don't think that functionality is on the 16 demo at the moment, but it's something we're looking for in the future.
Okay. I see one question up here on whether or not the auxes are pre-fade or post-fade. Those are all in here. Where is it? Under the edit, the channel strip. Down here below aux 1 through 6, these are the pre-fade, post-fade if you can change that there. So it's either.
And they're adjustable on a channel-by-channel basis.
Yeah. Yeah. What's next?
I have a bunch of questions here for you, Austin.
Yeah.
Would you like me to read them off? So the next question is asking, you said there was a dual function for the reset button. What's the second function?
Yeah, the entire console reset. You can load, you'll see in the manual, if you create a text file with, I can't recall the name of the file off the top of my head, but put that onto a flash drive and plug it into the side USB port. And then hit that reset while when the console resets, it'll go back, it'll be a complete factory reset back to the original firmware, like you just opened the box. Yeah.
Next question is asking, what device and browser are you using?
Which device and browser? I mean, I have just a PC laptop. I'm using Firefox here for the browser. It's just, you know, a normal installation, nothing too crazy. That's one of the big advantages of this console over a lot of them, is that you don't, or over almost every other console out there, is that you don't need special software to control this one. You can just, you know, once you're connected to the same network as the console, you can load up any browser and connect to the IP address, and it'll be there, and you can control it without needing to install anything. Yeah.
Okay, next question, which software do you use for stage?
The screenshot that I showed in here, I'm not actually sure what that one was. That was a text picture, or a picture that the artist had sent me. I personally use a program called StagePlot Pro. It's pretty versatile, but it makes nice, clean-looking input lists. Easy. It just takes a little bit of messing around with to get up and running, or to get proficient at it.
Okay, the next question is asking if you can talk a little bit more about ringing out the monitor.
Yeah, so monitors, ringing out the wedges, it's feedback control, and basically getting your wedges and your microphone to have what is a stable frequency response between the two. So you're not putting audio into the microphone from the wedge. You know, that feedback is it's feedback. It's the wedge feeding back into the microphone and vice versa, and increasing exponentially. But that happens at certain frequencies that are kind of higher than the rest in between the wedge and the microphone, or at different phase alignments. So generally, when I'm ringing out, you know, again, you set it's kind of the same process almost as doing that quick sound check, where I'll go up to the vocal channel. Here I'll go up to the vocal channel, and let me bring this back. We'll go to that vocal channel, you know, set everything at unity again, and just bring the gain up until it just starts to ring. It just starts to feedback a little bit, and then once you have that, where you can hear that little bit of feedback, that's where you would switch over and go to, go to the aux. I'm over here in the view group. That's where you go to this aux, the graphic equalizer, the 31-band graphic equalizer on the output. Find whatever frequency it is that's feeding back, and then you just turn that down a little bit, or turn it down until it stops feeding back. You can kind of get yourself into trouble, though. A minimal amount of EQ correction is ideal. You're better off fixing it with gain structure and placement than with equalization, if you can. Because every frequency you cut reduces the volume of your signal, which means you'll have to boost the gain, which means you're having more gain to feedback. You know, the gain before feedback ratio changes. So eventually you'll just kind of fighting yourself as you EQ out, as you adjust the EQ. Yeah. That's kind of my approach for ringing out. Yeah.
Wonderful. Next question. Can you set the foot switch to modeling?
You know, I don't actually know that. Let's see. Where would it be? Right here. It looks like these are your options here for what the pedal function does. That may have changed in a newer firmware update or with the Ui16. I'm not certain, but these are the functions for the pedal. Yeah.
Question. Can we exchange the graphic EQ for a parametric EQ on the output?
I don't believe so. I would actually like that functionality too. I find it faster to ring out that way, and you wind up with less less phasiness, if that's a thing, between when you're with a parametric over a graph when you're ringing out. But you know, these graphs, they seem to work pretty well. They're not, you know, they do their job, but yeah, there is no parametric on it, on the outputs.
Okay, the next question, they're asking if they're in a rental situation, can they load all of their files to the console from USB?
Yes, you can. In the under settings here, in the settings menu, and then shows, it's this import and export here for USB. You know, import from, I don't have a USB plugged in, but yeah, this is where you would do that.
Okay, the next question is asking what input level are you dialing in your vocals and other sources?
So I generally don't look a lot at the metering for this stuff. Numbers are kind of, can be deceptive. You're better off using your ears. You don't want to have everything too hot right off the bat. You'll have less feedback and have more control if you use only the amount of gain that you need. So by setting, in my workflow, by setting everything at unity before you started bringing the gain up, that allows you a lower gain or a higher gain before feedback ratio. So, you know, if you only use the amount of gain that you need, you'll have way less trouble with feedback. You know, use your ears, not your eyes, basically.
The next question is asking, how do you extend the Wi-Fi antenna to use remotely?
So the Wi-Fi, the connector on the front of the Ui16 is actually a, it's just a standard SMA connector. You can take it off, you know, you can grab a antenna off of a Wi-Fi router. Actually, I know for a fact the, where is it? ASUS routers with the removable antennas fit that as well. If you want to do it that way, using just the Wi-Fi antenna, personally, use an external access point. It's going to be more stable in the long run, and it'll reach farther than the internal Wi-Fi, than the internal hotspot. That is in the under these networks, or in the network here. It's in this config page. I don't have the password for this right in front of me. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but that's where you would set this up as a access point, or to use an access point.
Yeah, so what you want to do is you want to get a Ethernet router, like a home router, and have the Ethernet cable plugged into the Ethernet router. And then the challenge there that I see many people do is when you then go to your UI, you need to make sure that you're logged into the Wi-Fi on the router before, and you're going to the IP address of the UI product. I see quite often people connect to a router, but they're still, they forget to change their Wi-Fi connection, and they're still talking to the Wi-Fi on the front of the UI instead of talking through the router. Basically, a router is something that's purposely designed for Wi-Fi. Its whole function is doing Wi-Fi and networking, and in many cases, you're going to get far better performance off of a router than you would off the little antenna on the front of the unit. If in doubt what kind of router to get, I often recommend gaming routers, or what's called tri-band or Mumino routers. If you about $100 in the U.S., $100 to $150, you get some amazing routers with really with a lot of power and consistency.
Yep. And you can disable the internal hotspot, so that problem doesn't happen. You can disable it completely, so you don't have to worry about accidentally connecting to the UI over the external, which is what I've done here. Yeah.
Okay, next question. What is the use of channel safes in the settings show settings?
Settings shows, so channel, is that in here? Channel safes. So these, when you change scenes, when you load up a new scene, if you have these selected, the channels won't change from your current ones when you load the new scene. So, like for example, here maybe we'll channel safe our vocal lines here that we worked on, and then we'll load up the initial save to show, and then we will load up the we'll go back to the sound check and load, and you'll see that the changes that we made to the vocals here, these have all stayed. Oh, maybe this one didn't. What am I doing wrong here? Basically, it'll channel safe your scenes from snapshot to snapshot, so you don't have to worry about your gains changing or your EQ settings changing. But if you want to recall effects sends levels between songs or effect settings between songs, it'll allow you to do that. So it'll safe the channels from recall, but allow the other parameters of the console to be recalled. Yeah, I wonder. Oh, I see. I think it's show to show rather than what you call it. Where is it? So vocal 1, and then subgroup channel safe, so we have those saved, and then we load up a different show. I'll try to choose grass, and then back to the main page, and then I don't understand why these channel safes aren't working.
Yeah, I think it only goes snapshot to snapshot.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So the idea here is you start a show and you have a band, like a backing band that's consistent, and you have 2 singers come out in 1 act. You can set your settings for them, and during that show you may also tweak the band. When the next group comes out, or when the next set of singers comes out, you can recall their settings, but the band stays safe if you have the bands. If you have all the band's inputs as in safe mode. It's also really useful in musical theater, where you might have to snapshot to snapshot to snapshot. In the UI24, there's a more extensive version with shows, snapshots, and cues that's really helpful for the musical theater type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, you're looking for another question? We have a question asking, how do you set the compressors?
How do you set the compressor? So that is kind of the age-old question, isn't it? Again, by ear, there's kind of standards to start with. Generally, you want to have, I typically start, for vocals, 3, 4 to 1, somewhere in there, and then bring the threshold down until you're just getting a little bit of. You'll see in the comp call metering here, you'll get a few LEDs going, and then you want to have your attack time fast enough that it's catching what you need, but maybe not so fast that it's clipping your transients. Like on a kick drum, you don't want to lose that click, the beater hitting. So if you have your attack too fast, you'll cut that off, but it won't compress the tail of it, or it'll compress the whole thing. The release time is kind of based, it can be based song by song. You want your release to kind of make the song pump or breathe, or make the instrument pump or breathe with the timing. So that it's all kind of by ear, really. You kind of want the attack and release, or by release, with the snare drum and the kick drum, maybe, you know, you want the release time fast enough that it kind of goes back to 0 in between beats, you know, so you're not, the compressor catching the first beat isn't also compressing the second beat. You want it to kind of work, only do it note by note or beat by beat. There's no real, I guess, standards. Again, you know, do it by ear, and go from there. You know, yeah. Yeah, that's about it. There's you definitely want to do some reading on compression, but that's kind of a good starting point. You know, vocals 3-to-1, say, you know, that 3-to-1 with like a 10 millisecond and, you know, 100 millisecond. At least that'll get you started, and you use it so it's catching anything that's above the threshold or anything above the threshold that you want.
Yeah, I'd also add, one of the most important things about compressors or any dynamic stuff is having an idea of what you want to do with that before you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Playing with stuff in the middle of a show is, you should never touch anything in a show that you don't know exactly what you're doing on. So, yeah. So it's good to rehearse and practice with something. Study ahead. There's tons. I mean, the compression is a 50-year-old subject that is still not that's still actively in discussion.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why there's so many different styles of music. But the key thing is where you see the T circle in the middle. That's what's called the threshold. And compressors work above the threshold. Things that are happening below the threshold don't actually have an effect. And that's volume, how far up in volume. The other one, the R, is the ratio, and that's how much you want the sound compressed above a certain range. So if you're trying to control a vocal, you may turn down the threshold a little bit, but leave the ratio light. You may turn the threshold down farther, but on a snare drum, you want it to like cap the very top of it, so you get that snap. So you want to get to a certain dynamic and then take it down all the way. So you could spend days and weeks and months and years talking about compression.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Is there a view on the user interface where you can see multiple channel faders and see details like the preamp, EQ dynamics at the same time?
Not on the Ui16, I believe. I think.
Correct. On the Ui24, there's what's called big desktop mode, and that allows you to see your faders plus your entire channel strip of function, EQ, compression, effects sends, and effects returns on your. The big desktop is something that's currently only on Ui24, and we're looking to expand that in the future.
Okay, the next question is asking if you can talk a little bit more about virtual sound check and about subgroups, VCA, and its applications.
On this console, we don't have the ability to run a virtual sound check. That might be the case on the Ui24, or you might be able to on the Ui24. What was the second part?
Subgroups, VCA, and its applications.
Oh, we don't have, there's no VCAs on this console as either. It's, those are voltage controlled attenuators or actuators. It kind of, but subgroups, like I said earlier, it kind of allows you, every channel that you assign to a subgroup, it routes that output. It's basically another gain stage and another place for EQ and compression. So, you know, if you run your drums and bass together and you're able to compress them together, that'll allow, you know, if there's frequencies that are interacting in a negative way or a way that you don't want, you can cut, you know, those frequencies as a group instead of having to hunt channel by channel to reduce them or to cut them out. The other thing it allows you to do is compress as a group. So, you know, if you have that kick drum and the bass together in a group, it'll allow, you know, when that kick drum hits, it'll compress the drums and the bass at the same time. And again, kind of get that pumping, you know, that pumping kind of gluey sound together. And then the same thing with vocals, any issues with, harmonic interaction between the vocals, and you can compress them together as a group so that you don't wind up with, one singer that's drastically louder than all the others. You shouldn't really be that way anyway, but it'll kind of make everything mesh and jive together if you compress it all together in a subgroup. And then from the subgroup, it routes out to the master.
I have a few questions that are for you, Scott. The first one is asking, is there a UI16 firmware update planned?
We are looking at updates for all of our products. We're currently investigating some stuff on 16 as well as 24 as well as 12.
Okay, perfect. And then another question for you, Scott. What is the purpose of the HDMI port? Is there a use for it?
The HDMI port was in the initial design because it was included in a processor card that the system runs, that is core to the way the system functions. As the product developed, frankly, I made the call at the end that said, we need to have, we'd much rather have the mixing power in the system than a minimal amount of functionality at the HDMI out. So we just never turned on the HDMI out because we realized that at that point the functionality was so weak that it was not worth doing. We'd much rather use that functionality for mixing. In UI24, it has 4 times the processor and a more powerful HDMI function, so we were able to do that on the UI24.
Okay, and then we have a follow-up question for you, Scott, from an earlier question. It says, just coming back to my question concerning input level, from a design point of view, what is the optimum input level for an ideal signal-noise ratio and getting the internal effects, comp, EQ, time-based effects working properly?
Well, since I'm old, I'll talk about this a little bit. In the early days of this digital stuff, there was only so much dynamic range, especially when you're in 12-bit and 16-bit converters. And your dynamic range from your quietest point to your loudest point on your input there was only so much range. And so people tried to get as high up into that range as possible without peaking. One thing you never want to do on digital is peak the signal, peak the input. So the challenge was to get as high in there as you could to get the range. That was 1995. Now we're 2020. Now we've got 24-bit inputs. We have much higher quality ADs on these at this level of digital stuff. And at this point, really, you have up to like 140 dB of digital headroom, 110 dB of analog headroom, and you may be doing live sound. So if you're doing live sound, you have plenty of headroom inside of your signal. It's not so important to keep it up at the top. In general, when I'm doing live sound, I keep the meters at about 60 to 70%, because I know that if somebody coughs or if somebody sneezes or somebody yells or if somebody drops something, I don't want it to peak the whole system. Because there's plenty of headroom underneath. Now, when I'm in a studio, I'll run my gains higher because I have less worry about those bad things happening, about those unexpected things happening. But in live sound, you have so much accuracy and headroom on the inputs, especially with something like with UI16, they're good. In UI24, they're exceptional. That you can run average at about 60% up the meter and have excellent results. If I was recording, I'd probably be 70 to 75% of the meter. But it's not like, it's not like your father's digital mixer.
Yeah.
There are a couple more questions here for Austin.
Yeah.
How could you set things up for a live stream? USB, headphones, what would you use?
This console doesn't have any direct streaming capability, so what I do is I just run the master out into an interface and then into, into whatever streaming software I'm using, be it OBS or live stream or, whichever. I assume that the UI24 has either ASIO functionality or whatever other drivers they use. You could run that directly into your streaming software rather than, Yeah,
the primary difference is UI12 and 16 USB capability is just 2 channels. And on the UI24, you can take 32 streams from a UI24 to a USB connected device and back.
Yeah, the USB on here isn't a direct stream though, right? It's just record only, or are you able to?
It's the master output.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, another question. What is different in the auto feedback suppressor in this unit over other feedback suppressors?
It's really just the algorithm, whatever the math is that they use to implement it. Like I said, I don't use a lot of auto feedback suppression. It's more important to have your gain structure and your wedges rung out properly. I couldn't tell you exactly what makes these ones different. I've had better results with these ones over the ones I used, years ago, the rack mount ones, or, some of the other digital consoles have built in.
I'll chime in a little bit. The AFS2 system is good because it has a lot of filters and they're very, very narrow. And and you can set them so they're always listening. So as something worse comes up, it'll take one of the least used filters and put it on that. That very narrow functionality and the way that it brings it in, you'll really hear the difference in things like brass or instruments with more edge to them. You'll notice the AFS in lesser feedback systems, you'll hear ringing and kind of a bell type sound on those instruments when you have entry-level AFS. The DBX's AFS system is pretty exceptional, and we're planning new rounds of AFS also with ways to make it even better.
All right, that's all that came in for questions. So Austin, I wanted to thank you for presenting today. This was a really great presentation, and Scott, thank you for assisting. We appreciate both of you. And for those of you who attended, we appreciate you showing up. We know that there's a lot of webinars happening these days, and we wanted to share with you that we do have a full calendar that's available on pro.harman.com if you'd like to see any upcoming webinars. And as a reminder, this session was recorded, and we will be sending out the recording link to this in several days. So thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.